You know what I've concluded from this? He's the type of person to meet Baba Yaga in the woods and then ask her if she knows about a witch named Baba Yaga who eats people in the woods. Hello villagers, welcome back. I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be reading a story called The Landlady by Roald Dahl. Remember that guy who wrote a story about a kid that found a big ass peach? Yeah, him. So expect some weird things to transpire within this story. I recall reading this story almost 7 years ago when I was just a wee little lass, and it scarred me and essentially everyone in my grade 8 class. I don't remember much of it though because it's been repressed in my brain. So I thought, why not read it again? Because being traumatized once clearly wasn't enough. Except this time, I will be sharing my thoughts as we progress through the story. This story classifies as thriller, so I better be entertained. I'm not Sia, no cheap thrills please. By the way, if you're new, hi, my name is Kristen. I talk about urban legends, spooky stories, and creepy things in general. I'm usually making jokes though, and I don't add scary music anymore to my videos. It's not that scary. Let us get started. Time to put on my narrator voice. Billy Weaver had traveled down from London on the slow afternoon train with a change at reading on the way, and by the time he got to Bath, it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the moon was coming up out of the clear starry sky over the houses opposite the station entrance. But the air was deadly cold, and the wind was like a flat blade of ice on his cheeks. "Excuse me," he said, "but is there a fairly cheap hotel not too far away from here?" "Try the Bell and Dragon," the porter answered, pointing down the road. "They might take you in. It's about a quarter of a mile along the other side." Billy thanked him and picked up his suitcase and set out to walk on a quarter mile to the Bell and Dragon. "Excuse me, a quarter mile? I can't even make it up my staircase. When was this made?"
When was the Landlady?
1959, that makes sense, when people actually left their rooms. Okay, anyways. He had never been to Bath before. He didn't know anyone who lived there. But Mr. Greenslade at the head office in London had told him it was a splendid town. "Find your own lodgings," he said, "and then go along and report to the branch manager as soon as you've gotten yourself settled." Billy was 17 years old. "Excuse me, you're sending a minor on this giant journey by himself?" The audacity. He was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown trilby hat, and a new brown suit. And he was feeling fine. Oh yes, boy, feel yourself. As you should, period. He walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he had decided, was one of the common characteristics of all successful businessmen. The big shots up at head office were absolutely fantastically brisk all the time. They were amazing. Brisk. Let us search up what brisk is. Active, fast, and energetic. Huh. Couldn't be me. There were no shops on this wide street that he was walking along, only a line of tall houses on each side, all of them identical. They had porches and pillars and 4 or 5 steps going up to their front doors, and it was obvious that once upon a time they had been very swanky residences. But now, even in the darkness, he could see that the paint was peeling from the woodwork on their doors and windows, and that the handsome white facades were cracked and blotchy from neglect. Suddenly, in a downstairs window that was brightly illuminated by a street lamp not 6 yards away, Billy caught sight of a printed notice popped up against the glass in one of the upper panes. It said, "Bed and breakfast." There was a vase of yellow chrysanthemums, tall and beautiful, standing just underneath the notice. Okay, well, there has to be some symbolism for that. Happiness, love, longevity, and joy. Wait, do chrysanthemums symbolize death? In several European nations, including Belgium, Italy, France, and Austria, chrysanthemum symbolism has to do with death. Okay, so we're not off to a very good start. Let's see what Billy's going to do. His name is Billy, right? Is his name Billy? Yes. So let's see what little Billy is going to do. He stopped walking. He moved a bit closer. Green curtains, some sort of velvety material, were hanging down on either side of the window. The chrysanthemums looked wonderful beside them. He went right up and peered through the glass into the window, and the first thing he saw was a bright fire burning in the hearth. Hearth is a synonym for fireplace, I believe. On the carpet in front of the fire, a pretty little dachshund was curled up asleep with its nose tucked into its belly. The room itself, so far as he could see in the half-darkness, was filled with pleasant furniture. There was a baby grand piano and a big sofa, and several plump armchairs, and in one corner he had spotted a large parrot in its cage. Animals were usually a good sign in a place like this, Billy told himself, and all in all, it looked to him as though it would be a pretty decent place to stay, in a place like this. That has to be foreshadowing. There's no way. What do you guys think? I think it's foreshadowing. Certainly, it would be more comfortable than the Bell and Dragon. On the other hand, a pub would be more congenial than a boarding house. Congenial means pleasant or agreeable. There would be beer and darts in the evening and lots of people to talk to, and it would be probably a good bit cheaper too. He had stayed a couple of nights in a pub once before, and he had liked it. He had never stayed in any boarding houses, and to be perfectly honest, he was a tiny bit frightened of them, for good reason. Them things shady. The name itself conjured up images of watery cabbages, rapacious landladies, and powerful smell of kippers in the living room. Rapacious means greedy, and kippers is fish that's been salted and smoked. Apparently, it's commonly eaten for breakfast in Great Britain. After dithering about like this in the cold for 2 or 3 minutes, Billy decided that he would walk on and take a look at the Bell and Dragon before making up his mind. He turned to go. And now a queer thing happened to him. He was in the act of stepping back and turning away from the window, when all at once his eye was caught and held in the most peculiar manner by the small notice that was there. Bed and breakfast, it said. Bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast. Each word was like a large black eye, staring at him through the glass, holding him, compelling him, forcing him to stay where he was, and not to walk away from that house. And the next thing he knew, he was actually moving across from the window to the front door of the house, climbing up the steps that led up to it, and reaching for the bell. What kind of black magic How the hell is a sign compelling you that much, bro? It's just breakfast. He pressed the bell. Far away in a back room, he heard it ringing, and then at once. It must have been at least once, because he hadn't even had the time to take his finger from the bell button. The door swung open, and a woman was standing there. Normally, you ring the bell, and you have at least a half-minute's wait before the door opens. But this dame was just like a jack-in-the-box. He pressed the bell, and out she popped. It made him jump. Now that's shady. Think about what he said for a second. Usually you wait a little good while before someone opens the door. If she came out right away, that means that wouldn't she be like right by the door, staring at him or something? Interesting. She was about 45 or 50 years old, and the moment he saw him, she gave him a warm, welcoming smile. "Please come in," she said pleasantly. She stepped aside, holding the door wide open, and Billy found himself automatically starting forward. The compulsion, or more accurately, the desire to follow after her into the house, was extraordinarily strong. "I saw the notice in the window," he said, holding himself back. "Yes, I know." "How would you know?" How would you know that, though? That confirms my suspicion. She must have been staring at him while he was looking at inside her little place. "I was wondering about a room." "It's all ready for you, my dear," she said. She had a round pink face and very gentle blue eyes. "I was on my way to the Bell and Dragon," Billy told her, "but the notice in your window just happened to catch my eye." "My dear boy," she said, "why don't you come in out of the cold? How much do you charge?" 5 and 6 pence a night, including breakfast. It was fantastically cheap. It was less than half of what he'd been willing to pay. "If that is too much," she added, "then perhaps I can reduce it just a tiny bit. Do you desire an egg for breakfast? Eggs are expensive at the moment. It would be 6 pence less without the egg." 5 and 6 pence is fine," he answered. "I should like very much to stay here." "I knew you would. Do come in." Oh my god. Look at the illustration on this. Excuse me, Billy, but you have to be blind to think that she has a kind face. She looks like Voldemort with a nose. She seemed terribly nice. She looked exactly like the mother of one's best school friend, welcoming one into the house to stay for Christmas holidays. Billy took off his hat and stepped over the threshold. "Just hang in there," she said, "and let me help you with your coat." There were no other hats or coats in the hall. There were no umbrellas, no walking sticks, nothing. Suspicious for a boarding house, don't you think? "We have it all to ourselves," she said, smiling at him over her shoulder as she led the way upstairs. "You see, it isn't very often that I have the pleasure of taking a visitor into my little nest." Okay, this seems like some Coraline shit. You know, like the other mother? "The old girl is slightly dotty," Billy told himself. Dotty? Dotty? "The old girl is slightly dotty," Billy told himself. "But at 5 and 6 pence a night, who cares about that?" "I should have thought you'd be simply swamped with applications," he said politely. "Oh, I am, my dear. I am. Of course I am. But the trouble is that I'm inclined to be just a teeny-weeny bit choosy and particular, if you see what I mean." "Ah, yes. Everything is always ready day and night in this house, just on the off chance that an acceptable young gentleman will come along. And it is such a pleasure, my dear, such a very great pleasure, when now and again I open the door and I see someone standing there who is just exactly right. She was halfway up the stairs, and she paused with one hand on the stair rail, turning her head and smiling down at him with pale lips. Like you, she added, and her blue eyes traveled slowly all the way down the length of Billy's body, to his feet, and then up again. Miss Girl, are you checking our boy Billy out? I hope the you ain't. Excuse me, ma'am. I'm literally shivering from that. Why are you checking this man out? Like, lock your door, Billy. Put something in front of the door. On the second floor landing, she said to him, "This floor is mine." They climbed up another flight. "And this one is all yours," she said. "Here's your room. I do hope you'll like it." She took him into a small but charming front bedroom, switching on the light as she went in. "The morning sun comes right in the window, Mr. Perkins." "It is Mr. Perkins, isn't it?" "No," he said. "It's Weaver." "Mr. Weaver, how nice. I've put a water bottle between the sheets to air them out." "Mr. Weaver, it's such a comfort to have a hot water bottle in a strange bed with clean sheets. Don't you agree? And you may light the gas fire at any time if you feel chilly." "Thank you," Billy said. "Thank you ever so much." He noticed that the bedspread had been taken off the bed, and that the bedclothes had been neatly turned back on one side, all ready for someone to get in. "I'm so glad you appeared," she said, looking earnestly into his face. "I was beginning to get worried." "Get worried about what? I thought you said you already had a bunch of customers." "Okay." "That's all right," Billy answered brightly. "You mustn't worry about me." "Oh, honey, I doubt she's worrying about you." He put his suitcase on the chair and started to open it. "And what about supper, my dear? Did you manage to get anything to eat before you came here?" "I'm not a bit hungry, thank you," he said. "I think I'll just go to bed as soon as possible, because tomorrow I've got to get up rather early and report to the office." "Very well, then. I'll leave you now so you can unpack. But before you go, would you be so kind enough to pop into the sitting room on the ground floor and sign the book? Everyone has to do so because it's the law of the land, and we don't want to go breaking any laws at this stage of the proceedings, do we?" She gave him a little wave of the hand and went quickly out of the room and closed the door. Now, the fact that this landlady appeared to be slightly off her rocker didn't worry Billy in the slightest. After all, she was not only harmless, there was no question about it, but she was also quite obviously a kind and generous soul. That's some foreshadowing, guys. I'm calling it. That is foreshadowing. Okay, she's creeping me out. Am I the only one getting creeped out? Because, like, she reminds me of literally, like, the frickin' witch from Hansel and Gretel. Okay, let's get back to the story. Enough of my rambling. He guessed that she probably lost a son in the war, or something like that, and had never gotten over it. So a few minutes later, after unpacking his suitcase and washing his hands, he trotted downstairs to the ground floor and entered the living room. His landlady wasn't there, but the fire was glowing in the hearth, and the little dachshund was sleeping soundly in front of it. The room was wonderfully warm and cozy. "I'm a lucky fellow," he thought, rubbing his hands. "This is a bit of all right." He found the guest book lying open on the piano, so he took out his pen and wrote down his name and address. There were only 2 other entries above his on the page, and as one always does with the guest books, he started to read them. One was Christopher Mulholland from Cardiff. The other was Gregory W. Temple from Bristol. "That's funny," he suddenly thought. Christopher Mulholland. It rings a bell. Now, where on earth had he heard this rather unusual name before? Was it a boy at school? No. Was it one of his sister's numerous young men, perhaps? Or a friend of his grandfather's? No, it wasn't any of those. He glanced down again at the book. Christopher Mulholland, 231 Cathedral Road, Cardiff. Gregory W. Temple, 27 Sycamore Drive, Bristol. As a matter of fact, now that he came to think of it, he wasn't at all sure that the second name didn't have almost as much of a familiar ring about it as the first. "Gregory Temple?" he said aloud, searching his memory. "Christopher Mulholland? Such charming young boys," a voice behind him answered, and he turned and saw his landlady sailing into the room with a large silver tea tray in her hands. She was holding it well out in front of her, and rather high up, as though the tray were a pair of reins on a frisky horse. "They somehow sound familiar," he said. "They do? How interesting. I'm almost positive I've heard those names before somewhere. Isn't that odd? Maybe it was in the newspapers? They weren't famous in any way, were they? I mean, famous cricketers or footballers or something like that? Famous, she said, setting the tea tray down on the low table in front of the sofa. Oh no, I don't think they were famous, but they were incredibly handsome. Both of them. I can promise you that. They were tall and young and handsome, my dear. Just exactly like you. Excuse me, Billy, how are you not creeped out? I am literally narrating this, and I can feel chills going down my spine. This woman is profiling you. Billy, stop being so clueless. Once more, Billy glanced down at the book. Look here, he said, noticing the dates. This last entry is over 2 years old. It is? Yes, indeed. And Christopher Mulholland's is nearly a year before that. More than 3 years ago. Dear me, she said, shaking her head and heaving a dainty little sigh. I would never have thought it. How time does fly away from us all, doesn't it, Mr. Wilkins? It's Weaver, Billy said. W-E-A-V-E-R. Oh, of course it is, she cried, sitting down on the sofa. How silly of me. I do apologize. In one ear and out the other. That's me, Mr. Weaver. You know something, Billy said, something that's really quite extraordinary about this? No, dear, I don't. Well, you see, both of these names, Mulholland and Temple, I not only seem to remember each one of them separately, so to speak, but somehow or the other, in some peculiar way, they both appear to be sort of connected together as well, as though they were both famous for the same sort of thing, if you see what I mean. Like Dempsey and Tunney, for example, or Churchill and Roosevelt. Oh my god, and now we have another lovely picture here. Just the pictures alone, freaking, I'm gonna see it in my dreams tonight. Ma'am, where is your hairline? I'm not even kidding, it looks like they're eggs. How amusing, she said. But come over here now, dear, and sit down beside me on the sofa, and I'll give you a nice cup of tea and a ginger biscuit before you go to bed. You really shouldn't bother, Billy said. I didn't mean you to do anything like that. He stood by the piano, watching her as she fussed about with the cups and saucers. He noticed how she had small, white, quickly moving hands and red fingernails. I'm almost positive it was in the newspapers I saw them, Billy said. I'll think of it in a second, I'm sure I will. There is nothing more tantalizing than a thing like this that lingers just outside the border of one's memory. He hated to give up. Now wait a minute, he said. Wait just a minute. Mulholland. Christopher Mulholland. Wasn't that the name of the Eton schoolboy who was on a walking tour through the West Country? And then all of a sudden, milk? She said. And sugar? Yes, please. And then all of a sudden, Eton schoolboy, she said. Oh no, my dear. That can't possibly be right. Because my Mr. Mulholland was certainly not an Eton schoolboy when he came to me. He was a Cambridge undergraduate. Come over here now and sit next to me and warm yourself in front of this lovely fire. Come on, your tea's all ready for you. She patted the empty place beside her on the sofa, and she sat there smiling at Billy, waiting for him to come over. Why does she keep interrupting Billy? That is my question. I have a feeling she knows something, and it somehow relates to her. Listen to that, like, he was on a walking tour through the West Country, and then all of a sudden, what happened? What happened? Was he murdered? Did he go missing? Was he kidnapped? Probably. I wonder why. Why does she keep interrupting him? He crossed the room and slowly sat down on the edge of the sofa. She placed his teacup on the table in front of him. There we are, she said. How nice and cozy this is, isn't it? Billy started sipping his tea. She did the same. For half a minute or so, neither of them spoke. But Billy knew that she was looking at him. Her body was half turned towards him, and he could feel her eyes resting on his face, watching him over the rim of her teacup. That's creepy. Now and again, he caught a whiff of a peculiar smell that seemed to emanate directly from her person. It was not in the least unpleasant, and it reminded him, well, he wasn't quite sure what it reminded him of. Pickled walnuts? New leather? Or was it the corridors of a hospital? At length, she said, Mr. Mulholland was a great one for his tea. Never in my life have I seen anyone drink as much tea as dear, sweet Mr. Mulholland. I suppose he left fairly recently, Billy said. He was still puzzling his head about the two names. He was positive now that he had seen them in the newspapers, in the headlines. Left? She said, arching her brows. My dear boy, he never left. He's still here. Mr. Temple is also here. They're on the 4th floor, both of them, together. What's on the 4th floor, though? I don't remember them talking about it. How are they still there together? It's been over 2 to 3 years. Billy set his cup down slowly on the table and stared at his landlady. She smiled back at him, and then she put out one of her white hands and patted him comfortingly on the knee. How old are you, my dear? She asked. 17. 17! She cried. Oh, it's the perfect age. Mr. Mulholland was also 17, but I think he was a trifle shorter than you are. In fact, I'm sure he was. And his teeth weren't quite so white. You have the most beautiful teeth, Mr. Weaver. Did you know that? They're not as good as they look, Billy said. They've got simply masses of fillings in them in the back. Mr. Temple, of course, was a little older, she said, ignoring his remark. Damn, girl, you rude. He was actually 28, and yet I never would have guessed it if he hadn't told me. Never in my whole life. There wasn't a blemish on his body. Pardon? Ma'am, how would you know that? How would you know that there wasn't a blemish on his body? Like, there is something obviously going on here. How are you not even feeling like the least bit suspicious? How thick is your head, my guy? There wasn't a blemish on his body. A what? Billy said. His skin was just like a baby's. There was a pause. Yeah, bro, I'm pausing too. What the frick is happening? I swear to God, if you don't question this and you don't leave, I'm gonna be slamming my head into my desk, okay? There are so many things that are wrong, and Billy's there like, la 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 la. Billy picked up his teacup and took another sip of his tea. Then he set it down again gently in the saucer. He waited for her to say something else, but she seemed to have lapsed into another of her silences. He sat there staring straight ahead of him into the far corner of the room, biting his lower lip. That parrot, he said at last. You know something? It had me completely fooled when I first saw it through the window. I could have sworn it was alive. Alas, no longer. It is most terribly clever the way it's been done, he said. It doesn't look in the least bit dead. Who did it? I did. You did? Of course, she said. And have you met my little Basil as well? She nodded towards the dachshund curled up so comfortably in front of the fire. Billy looked at it, and suddenly he realized that this animal had all the time been just as silent and motionless as the parrot. He put out a hand and touched it gently on the top of its back. The back was hard and cold, and when he pushed the hair to one side with his fingers, he could see the skin underneath, grayish, black, and dry, and perfectly preserved. So, you're telling me she stuffs living things, she stuffed her parrot, and she stuffed her dog? I won't judge, because some people have some really weird activities, but I think, Billy, you should leave, because if we think back to the first thing that he was saying when he saw the landlady's little place, didn't he say that safe places and, like, places that you want to stay at are places where there are animals? Does that not mean that she freaking tricks people into thinking that this place is nice and safe? If they're dead, that defeats his whole reasoning before of why he could come in here and feel okay. I'm not explaining myself correctly, but I hope you can understand what I'm saying. Good gracious me, he said. How absolutely fascinating. He turned away from the dog and stared with deep admiration at the little woman beside him on the sofa. It must be awfully difficult to do a thing like that. Not in the least, she said. I stuff all my little pets myself when they pass away. Will you have another cup of tea? No, thank you, Billy said. The tea tasted faintly of bitter almonds, and he didn't much care for it. Wait a second. Did this man just say bitter almonds? Okay, I'm not supposed to really know this, but isn't bitter almonds the taste of cyanide? No, we're gonna search this up. Please, oh my god. Please, Billy, tell me you're not gonna die. Cyanide is a poison that tastes like bitter almonds. It prevents the body from absorbing oxygen. Billy, how do you not know this? Okay, well, I guess most people would not know that they're dying of cyanide poisoning, but sir, ma'am, duck, dog, Billy is dying. Billy's a goner. I'm witnessing a murder in action here. Okay. Let us finish the story. I have a good feeling this is not going to end well for Billy. It's time to go, Billy. You did sign the book, didn't you? She said. Oh, yes. That's good, because later on, if I happen to forget what you were called, then I could always come down here and look it up. I still do that almost every day with Mr. Mulholland and Mr. Temple, Billy said. Gregory Temple. Excuse my asking, but haven't there been any other guests here except them in the last 2 or 3 years? Holding her teacup high in one hand, inclining her head slightly to the left, she looked up at him out of the corner of her eyes and gave him another gentle little smile. "No, my dear," she said, "only you." Billy's gonna die. Billy is literally gonna die. Dude, I don't understand. There's so many red flags that she was literally the culprit. I don't know how he didn't get that. You know what I've concluded from this? He's the type of person to meet Baba Yaga in the woods and then ask her if she knows about a witch named Baba Yaga who eats people in the woods. "Hey, you over there." "Yeah." "I heard that there's a person-eating witch that looks like an old lady in these woods. Is that true?" "Yeah." "Well, then you better be careful. An old lady like you shouldn't be out here." "I find my food here, though." "Oh, yeah? Like mushrooms?" "No. Meat." "I see. There aren't any animals in this area, though." "By the way, is that a house on chicken legs behind you?" "Yeah." "Strange. The witch is also said to live in a house on chicken legs. I feel like I'm missing something." Okay, well, anyways, that's the end of this story. Billy's dead. There's no way. Billy's dead, just like the rest of them. I think she stuffed them. Because just think about it. How are they still there almost 2-3 years later? Every day she comes down to remember them. If she forgets, like if they're still here, they would always come and talk to you, know? So how would you be able to forget their names? Unless they aren't alive to tell you them. I think she stuffed them, and she's going to stuff Billy too. She's gonna kill him, and then she's gonna stuff him. Okay, you know what? I remember why I was traumatized now. Who the hell stuffs random people? So that's why she was worried that no one was coming. She might have thought that they were onto her. This sweet poor boy hasn't a clue what's going on. R.I.P. Billy. I feel a little bit sick that she's going to stuff him. Most likely, because she sees she's like objectifying him. The way she looks him up and down, the way she always comments on his appearance. Yeah, she's stuffing him, and he's gonna become an object for her to just have around. I don't know, that's just freaking disgusting. I'm gonna be looking under my bed tonight. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the narration. If you want more narration stories, let me know. Well, I'm planning on doing them, but more like just stories and no commentary. But if you still want me to add some commentary in, let me know in the comments. I know like some people don't like people interrupting during the story, but personally, I'm one of those people that like to talk about it as I'm reading it or as I'm watching something. I like discussing it. But if you do want me to be quiet, let me know, and I will. I'll just be like narrating it with just the thoughts in my head. I will see you next week with another video. Yeah. I'm sorry. This thing is really bothering me. I can't believe they gave this to me and other 12, 13-year-olds to read. Who gives 12 and 13-year-olds a story to read about an old lady stuffing people? Like, my teacher was on something. I don't know what she was on, but she was on something. Anyways, bye! Thanks so much for watching.